I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share their images, photography tips, and a little bit of inspiration to help you improve your photography skills. The schedule for our upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. If you can't join us live, by subscribing, you'll be notified when a new session is added to the channel. Tonight's guest is Shari Hunt. Shari is an astrophotographer that leads tours and workshops to some of the darkest skies in Texas and even beyond our state's borders. I met Shari a few years ago and invited her to co-host a night photography workshop for a group of women. She generously shared her knowledge in two previous sessions. Number 10 was the Milky Way hunting for beginners, and most recently, session number 50, creating star trails. And in tonight's presentation, using PhotoPills for night sky photography, Shari's going to explain how she uses the app to plan for night sky photography, including photographing the galactic core of the Milky Way, configuring longer exposures for star trails and foreground images, and a little bit more. If you're on Instagram, look for her at Shari_Hunt_photography. And her website is at sharihuntphotography.com. Welcome back to the Happiness Hour, Shari.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right.
Okay, so one of the things that Shari said is that she might talk a little fast tonight. And if that's the case, slow her down, ask questions. I always record these to put them on the YouTube channel. So they're usually up on Friday nights, but I'm traveling at the moment. So if it's not up there on Friday, just give me a little bit of leeway. But for the most part, we're going to get all of this available to you either tonight live or on the YouTube channel. So Shari, I know that this summer you were in the Pacific Northwest, and I know that because you generously invited me and I couldn't go. But so I'm hoping that you'll share some of those photos and some of those some tips on how you plan that trip. But without any more use of my words, I'm gonna let you have the channel. So welcome and thank you for doing this again.
No problem. Not at all. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention first. I absolutely will not be able to cover everything in PhotoPills. There's so much that this app can do, but I absolutely use it all the time. It is worth every penny. It is it was at one point a $10 app. I don't know if it's still $10, but I use it for almost all of my night sky planning, big time. And so it's worth every penny of it. PhotoPills is out of Spain, a couple of guys that developed it, and they have a ton of free guides online. They have a ton of free videos. They even have their own workshops where you can do PhotoPill workshops throughout the world, actually. And so it's one of those apps where the more you use it, the more you get used to it. And it's, if you don't use it in a while, you kind of lose it like a language. So it's something you've got to practice at and get used to. But I absolutely love this app. I think I would be lost without it. So, and then I have a couple videos in this presentation. Hopefully they will go okay with the bandwidth here. And then I need to say I probably have a couple dogs that might chirp up. So hopefully they'll be okay, but bear with me if they do. So, okay. So what I really want to go through tonight is what I absolutely use all the time in PhotoPills. Like I said, there's a bunch of other things that PhotoPills will do that I just don't have the time to go into. And in fact, I still don't know the entire app very well. There's areas of the app I have knowledge of, but I haven't used them consistently. So I in no mind am a good teacher for that. So I'm going to go over how to use the planner and kind of go through an example of how I would plan a Milky Way viewing for photography. And then I'm going to talk about the moon aspect of the app. I'm going to talk about the night augmented reality part of it and how to find the moon, sun, and the Milky Way. And one of my favorite parts of the app is calculating a long exposure. I'll talk about why in the world I'd want to do that. And then ensuring pinpoint stars. We'll talk a little bit about that and why that's important. And then I also want to mention, there was a really great question earlier. Somebody asked, should I pull out my app and kind of go along with you? You're welcome to try that. Sometimes the app will give you certain issues or problems depending on the permissions you've given your device. And so I might be talking too fast to hold up for everybody, but I totally recommend going back and looking at the YouTube version and being able to pause and catch up, because I think that would actually work better. But of course, you're welcome to try it. So I want to preface the whole conversation really with, I don't only use PhotoPills for planning. I use Google Earth a ton. And I, in fact, probably use Google Earth first before I go to my PhotoPills. And if you're not familiar with Google Earth, you can pretty much go anywhere on the planet and zoom in and find spots to look at. And this is an example where I'm going from Google Earth and I'm trying to head over to Mount Rainier. And there's a spot on Mount Rainier I love shooting at to align the Milky Way with the mountain in later summer. And what's really good about using Google Earth is you can look around the landscape for where you think you might want to shoot. And you can find things like, are there buildings there? Are there light poles even? And what's even better is you can zoom into an area and look at other photographers' pictures that are posted on Google Earth, and you can get a sense of the landscape. So this video is kind of showing you me just looking around. If I take this particular trail from this particular parking lot, what am I going to see on the mountain here? I absolutely use Google Earth a ton for planning before I really hop into PhotoPills. So I just wanted to preface that's probably just as handy as PhotoPills for planning. So let's jump into the planner and talk about the planner. That's probably the 99% of the app that I use. And so I want to kind of break down what's in the planner, the layout, and then I'm going to go through what it all means. So the planner has a couple different parts. So I'm going to go through those. The top part is called the top panels. There's 11 top panels, and I'm going to go through those in a second. And then there's the map. And the map has a couple different viewings, different ways to view. I'll go through that in a second as well. Below the map is what's called the time bar. And then below the time bar is what PhotoPills calls bottom options. So we'll talk a little bit about those as well. But before we jump into the top panels, which I think is the most intensive part of the planner app, let's jump into the map first. So on the map, there are 3 buttons on the bottom, and these 3 buttons are the GPS button, and then a plus sign, and then the layers. And first, right off the bat, you're going to see a red pen on your map. And that red pen is essentially what you're shooting. It's the shooting spot anywhere that you put it. So there's many ways to move this red pen. I'm only going to tell you 2 because it's the 2 that I use. I don't use any other method. So number 1, I can take my finger and actually hold it down anywhere on the map, and that red pen will automatically move to where my finger is. So if I wanted to get a real specific spot, like this is near Big Bend National Park, I can open up the map by using my fingers, just like on an iPhone. And then I can basically hold my pen down and that pen will automatically move. The other way to move that red pen is there's the GPS button. It looks like a little paper airplane with a pen in it. And if I touch that button, that red pen will automatically move to wherever I'm currently at. Now, if that doesn't work, it's because you haven't given your device access to PhotoPills. And so you'll need to go back into the settings of your device and give it access. The next 2 buttons, there's the map toolbar, which I actually never use. But the next one is actually in map settings. And within the map settings, there's map type. And I recommend, if we all wanted to kind of start at the same foundation, I recommend putting it on Google Hybrid for now. But that map is just similar to your phone map in that you can change the settings. You can change it to satellite or terrain. And if I'm really looking at terrain and lining up Milky Way or sunrise with specific objects on the landscape, then I want to look at satellite because I can really see, or terrain, a whole lot better than the standard Google map. I recommend that on map tools, you just click none. That actually will clear the map of a lot of clutter, and we'll get to that clutter in a minute, but it'll be a lot easier when you first start working with the app. And on map layers, I actually recommend that you set those layers to hidden. So there's an eye icon on the left of every layer. If you click it where the eye is not visible, there's a line through it. That'll actually hide a lot of layers that we're actually going to get to, but it just kind of helps keep your map clean. Because otherwise what happens when I normally explain this to people in person, they're like, well, why does my map not look like yours? Well, we're going to get to that part of it. And then let's talk about the time bar. The time bar is really unique in that it will tell me what I'm looking at for the shooting spot, what day and time I'm at. I can set my time bar in a minute based on the bottom options, but I can also hold my finger on the time bar. And if I hold it on there, it actually will expand that time bar to get more accurate. So as I move my finger across the time bar, it can go really fast throughout the day. But if I want to get really precise and slow it down, I just hold my finger on it and it will expand. And I'll show you guys an example of that in a second. And then finally, the bottom options, the two that I use the most is the night AR for augmented reality, and then those three dots on the right under more. And that's the most important one because that's where you can set your date. And we will talk about that now. So if I click on that more icon with the three dots, I'll get a menu that pops up from the bottom. And I don't use any other of those items except for date. And when I go to date, I can actually select now, which will select current time and date. Or if I were standing somewhere and I wanted to look at, gee, what does this look like in August or next December, I can select that date and time. So that's going to be really useful for anything that you're looking at on the map, as well as the top panels. Okay, so now let's dive into these top panels. And this is where it can get really tricky, but I'm going to try to go through each one that I use. And I use almost all of them except the first two and the last three, really. So the top panels, as you slide your finger across to the left, that's how you're going to swipe through each panel. And so there's 11 of them, and I'm going to go through these individually. So the first panel is all about shadow length. I never use this. I wouldn't really know much to tell you about how to use it. I think I've used it once, and it's one of those things where if you don't use it, you kind of lose it. So I'm certainly not going to talk about that tonight. The next panel is the pen-to-pen geodetic information. That is actually set up where if I want to figure out if the moon or the sun will be above a mountain at a certain time, or below the horizon, or maybe even below a building, I actually can figure all that out using two pens. Again, this is a little bit more intermediate to advanced on PhotoPills. And so I've done this about 5 times, and I don't do it consistently, so I'm not going to be a good teacher for it. So I'm going to bypass those first two top panels here. The third panel is one that I use quite a bit. So this is called the sun and moon position. And this is actually where I will look to determine the sun's position at any time. As I move my finger across the time bar, it'll give me the azimuth and it'll give me the elevation. And so I want to just describe really quick what azimuth and elevation is, just in case you guys don't know. So azimuth is going to be anywhere on the compass that I'm looking. And let me pull up my compass. So the compass is divided into 360 degrees. And if the sun, for example, is at 97 degrees azimuth, I know it's going to be a little bit southeast, right? And the reason this is helpful is if you're anticipating a sunrise and you have no idea if your camera is really pointed in the right spot, you can actually get out your compass and look at wherever it's supposed to rise at sunrise. So if I move my time bar right to sunrise, then it says 90 degrees azimuth, that's actually where it's going to rise. So it helps when I'm planning Milky Way or blue hour shots to make sure my camera is in the right direction. And then elevation is actually how high that celestial body is going to be. And in this case, elevation is 15 degrees. And for most folks who don't know, a very rough estimate of elevation is you can put your fist on the horizon, and that's 10 degrees. And so if I know, for example, that the sun at a certain time, maybe during an eclipse, is going to be at 90 degrees or 75 degrees, I can actually estimate that with fist measurements to make sure that my camera is pointed in the right direction as well. So those are kind of helpful when we're anticipating a moonrise or a sunrise, or even when the galactic core appears. So the other thing is when I open up this panel and I get it on the phone, and I open it up, there's a couple things that can happen with this panel. So on the right, I'm going to pause this video for a second. There's a button here, and if I open up this panel, if I touch the button once, I'm going to get 3 blue lines. So the light colored blue line is actually going to give me the direction of the moon rise. The dark colored blue line is going to give me the direction of the moon set. And as I move my time bar, so if I put my finger on the time bar on this panel, it will show me the direction of the moon. If I touch that icon again, I'll actually get all 4 lines. 2 of them represent the sunrise and sunset, and then the moonrise and moonset. And so I can keep touching that icon, and I can get just the moon independently, just the sun independently, or all 4 of them. And then again, I can have these smaller lines show me the actual current direction of the moon or the sun at any time. So that's useful if you are a sunset, sunrise, moonset, moonrise person, to know kind of where it is, because what you can do is basically pinch in your map and get really specific on maybe a certain terrain to find out the exact time the moon might be directly over a mountain or to the side of a mountain, whatever your composition is. So the next panel is called the sun and moon setting times. And this is useful to get a good exact times. So for example, and notice that the colors relate to those lines we just talked about. So the moonrise on this particular day, I set this up for September 5th. The sunrise was at 7:33. And also, this is where the sunrise will show you at what direction. So the sunrise on this day was at 81 degrees azimuth. And again, that's helpful if you want to set up your camera before the sun ever gets onto the horizon to anticipate exactly where it's going to be. Now, you could use the augmented reality that I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm also going to talk about how sometimes if you're not calibrated correctly, you could be terribly wrong for sunrise. So we'll talk about that in a second as well. Okay, the next top panel is the blue and golden hour. If you're a landscape photographer at all, you know what these mean. For me, I don't use this as much. I do shoot a lot of blended exposures for Milky Way. So that means that I'll take a blue hour shot, and then I'll wait till after twilight to take the shot of the Milky Way, and then I'll blend those together. So these are useful times, but I think they're more useful for folks who like to shoot during golden hour. So the next panel is real important for me. These are the twilight times. And twilight's really important because if I'm shooting Milky Way, I want to shoot after astronomical twilight has ended for the night and before it begins. And so typical night will look like this. We're going to have a lot of spillage of light into the sky during civil and nautical and astronomical twilights, which is fine. They might make wonderful pictures, and I might still be able to capture the Milky Way during that time, but the light is constantly changing. And as long as we have constantly changing light, we are going to have to change our exposure. So I usually don't start shooting Milky Way until after astronomical twilight has ended. And this particular panel will tell me when I can start that. So on this particular day in September, I could start shooting after 9:32 p.m. and I've got until 6:12 a.m. if I want to shoot anything in total darkness. Now, mind you, this is if the moon is not in the sky and I don't have any ambient light around. If the moon's going to come up, and in this particular example, the moon isn't in the sky until 2 a.m. So I need to make sure that the moon's not in the sky. But if it wasn't in the sky, then I would have from 9:30 to 6 to shoot in total darkness. And so this particular top panel is really critical for that. Okay, so the next panel is when we get to some really good Milky Way information. So this is going to tell me on that night, September 5th, when the Milky Way will actually, when the core, I should say, of the Milky Way will be in the sky. And in this particular night, it will be in the sky. It will be visible from 9:32 until 1:29. Incidentally, I want to point out that 9:32 lines up with the end of astronomical twilight. So if there wasn't a moon in the sky, then I could probably see that Milky Way core at 9:32. What this particular panel does not tell you is that you have to remember on panel 4, there's a big giant moon in the sky. And in fact, it's over 50%. So anytime we have a moon that is over 10%, or if it's in the middle of the Milky Way core, it really obscures that brightness of the core and the colors. And so if the moon weren't in the sky, I would know to look between 9:30 and 1:30 in the morning. Now, the really cool thing about this particular app too is as I run my finger across the time bar, I will also get azimuth. And this is correlating to the core. So if I want to know, maybe at a certain time, will the middle of the Milky Way core be above a certain object or line up with a certain object, I can use my compass and azimuth to figure that out, like I showed you guys earlier. And so I sometimes only have my Apple Watch as a compass. So I put the compass app on there because it works quite well in the middle of nowhere. In fact, just last week, I didn't have my phone, totally died in Yosemite National Park. And all I had was my iPhone watch. So, or my watch. So I was able to line up a blue hour shot with blending Milky Way using the compass on my phone. So that was, using the compass on my watch, which was incredibly helpful. Okay, so on this particular panel, we have something we can pull up on the map. So with this particular panel, we've got an icon we can click here on the left. And when I click this icon, I'm actually going to get a bunch of dots. So I'm going to go ahead and start this video only to pause it. And I want to show you a couple things here. So right now on my map, all I have is my red pen. That means my current shooting location. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I think on this video, I move myself. So I know I zoom in a little bit on the map. I know of a parking lot that I shoot at quite a bit. I'm holding my finger down to make sure I'm in the right spot. And then I also want to make sure I'm on a good date. And so I'm going to click on the more and go to date. And I'm actually going to go to our last new moon, which was August 27th. And now I'm going to go ahead and click on those Milky Way dot icons, and I'm going to pull up 2 lines. And the light gray line is actually going to be the line for when the core appears in the sky, and that's going to be the actual direction of the core. And then the darker line is when the core will disappear. And so as you can see, we're still not even at sunset on my timeline here. But as I click play, and I move the timeline, you're going to see a globe icon kind of pop up, and then you're going to see some white dots. And so those white dots actually are going to represent the Milky Way, and the larger dots in the middle are going to represent the core. So it's somewhat of a 3D effect of how the Milky Way will look in the sky as we move the timeline. So I want to kind of show you again, as I move it again, you'll see that bigger dot at one point. If I'm standing at the red pen, it's going to lean off a little bit to the left. Then it gets vertical right here, and that's at 11:23 p.m. And then it's going to lean off to the right. So if you can kind of imagine a 3D model here, that's exactly what we're going to see in the sky. All right, so I use this app, this particular panel all the time to try to get an idea if I can line up the core, those bigger dots, with something more specific that might be in the landscape. Now, at this point, what I might do is take my map and actually put it on the terrain layer, and then I can actually see that landscape a little bit better rather than the standard Google layer. Okay. So the next panel is called Galactic Center, I believe, Position or Visibility. Can't see it because of all the names there, but this panel is kind of helpful, but also somewhat misleading. What this panel will show you is PhotoPills calls this the blue energy bar. Blue energy is good, and all that means is if there's not a moon in the sky, that whole bar fills up with blue lines. And so this is actually indicating that we actually do have a moon in the sky, and if the core was out after 1:30 in the morning, it would be visible. But in fact, if I look at all my top panels, I've got a moon that sets at 2:02 a.m. Astronomical twilight does end at 9:32, but then the visibility of the core on panel 7 says that it sets at 1:29. So in fact, on September 5th, there was no way I was going to be able to see the galactic core of the Milky Way. So that kind of just, you've got to kind of look and across 3 different panels there to know the possibilities. But if I had jumped back 1 week to the new moon, that would have been a perfect night for Milky Way. And in fact, I was lucky enough to be in Yosemite National Park for that night, and it was gorgeous. So, but I digress. Okay, so on this particular top panel, I also want to show you, so if you click on the actual icon, it'll take you automatically to the next new moon, which is kind of really cool. So if you want to know, gee, when do I need to be here for the next new moon date, it'll immediately take you to that next date. But be careful, because some people don't realize that they change the dates and then they're looking at the wrong information, and that happens with people quite a bit. Okay, so the next 2 tabs, or the next 2 panels, are actually used for getting information about an eclipse. So if I click on panel 9, or the top number 9 panel, right now, at the time of doing this presentation, I didn't have any eclipse loaded. But when I click on that icon, this is the menu that I'll get up, and PhotoPills will automatically pull up all of the next available eclipse, even partial eclipse. So it's really cool. And it'll actually show you what's visible from your red pen location. So if something's not visible from where that red pen was, I could move it maybe to a different country and it might be visible. So I went ahead and put in and tapped on the November 8th total moon eclipse. And what that does is that will let me know that actually I can view that eclipse from Big Ben. That's where my red pen was. And the next top panel, panel number 10, will actually show me the phases of the eclipse. So it looks like at 5 a.m., it'll be at totality. So that's a really useful couple of panels to use. I have never used these panels to watch an eclipse. They actually produced these panels after the last eclipse I saw, but they're really useful for getting your camera ready and knowing when to pay attention. And I know there's a lot of other resources out there about eclipse as well. And then finally, the last top panel, same thing, you can load up the next meteor shower, and that will actually put another icon on your map to show you, in fact, where to look to get the radiant of those meteors. So that's actually really helpful, and I use that quite a bit when I'm trying to track the radiant of the meteor shower. So those are basically the top 11 panels. And again, that's probably a huge handful of information to give you, but the more you practice looking at these panels, I think the more you work with them, the more you get used to them.
Can I interrupt with a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Jamie, I'm going to not miss this one. Jamie's curious, does the phase panel show you times in local time zones?
Yes, it will. And I will, when you go to the map, so I'm going to back up a little bit, bear with me, guys. When you go to the map setting, I can't see this, but see where it says time zone below? You can have your time zone get automatically detected where you are. But if, for example, I plan to shoot at Mount Rainier or in different states all the time, I can turn off auto detect and I can put it wherever I'm going to be. So I absolutely want to make sure that my time zone is correct for where I'm planning. Good question. Okay, let me get back to where we were on the next part of PhotoPills that I use quite a bit. So I'm going to forward through here. Sorry, guys. All right, so the other part of PhotoPills I use quite a bit is the moon menu. And I use it two ways. If I click on moon, I first get the menu where I can actually scroll through and I can get detailed information about the moon. I don't use this for moon times because I can get those on the planner app, but I use these to know what phase the moon is in. So for example, if I'm going to be like in a park and I know the moon's in the sky, I can get a little bit more detailed information. If I know it's only a 5% moon, I'm okay with that for a slight little bit of light on the landscape. But sometimes I don't like working with a moon that's brighter than 30 or 40%, especially if I'm trying to capture the Milky Way. So this will give me a little bit of idea on the timeline. And if you look at the timeline here, you can see moonset times, sunrise times, moonrise, and then even when the galactic core starts to appear or disappear. I don't use that panel as much as at the very bottom, I click on the calendar icon, and this one I use all the time because I can't tell you how many times I'm on the phone with friends or standing around with friends and we immediately agree we want to go to Death Valley again, and when do we want to go? So I end up pulling up this particular calendar because I can immediately go to like February 2023 and know the exact weekend I want to go to Death Valley. So it's a great, quick way to look at moon cycles a year or more in advance. So that's what I use the moon menu for the most. Okay, let's get into night augmented reality, because this is probably what everybody loves about this app, and it's so friendly and easy to use. So if I click on night augmented reality, there's two things you want to make sure you've got set up first. The first thing is settings. And same thing, if I want to look at what's in front of me, current date and time, I can turn that on. But if I know that I want to be here maybe in February and I want to look at, is there even a Milky Way in the sky in late February in Death Valley, I can check that out. And in fact, there is. So what I would do is I would turn off the current date and time, and then I would go ahead and switch and move the calendar to a February date. And also I want to make sure that I turn off the auto detect on the time zone and make it the correct time zone that I'm looking at. So you always want to make sure your settings are aligned with your plan. The next thing you want to do with night augmented reality is you want to make sure you are calibrated. Many times, I don't know, more often than not, I have to recalibrate my phone because the Milky Way is all of a sudden in the north. The core of the Milky Way is like in the north sky, and I know that's completely wrong. And so I actually recorded this a little earlier today because I thought it would be fun to make a video on calibrating, but I also kind of threw in a couple other things on how to find the sun. So bear with me, I'm going to start on this video and hopefully it'll play a little bit on calibration. Hey guys, so I am standing here in a field in Dallas, and I want to show you how to estimate or find where the sun or moon might rise or set, but also calibrate the augmented reality part of PhotoPills. That's really important because you can get to a location and spend quite a time setting up the shot, but if you're not calibrated, it will not work. So let me kind of show you what I would do to do this. So let's just assume I was over near Mansfield earlier today. What I want to make sure is, A, I've got my red pin in the right location where I'm currently standing, but also I want to make sure I'm on the right date. So go ahead and click on that bottom button on the map. That looks like a paper airplane with a pin in it. And that's your GPS button. That's going to put that red pin right where you're standing at that very moment. The next thing we want to do is that three dots on the bottom right. It says more on that icon. I'm going to click that. I want to click on date, and I want to make sure I've set to now. That's going to bring us to the current date. And what I can see right now is it's actually 7:14 in the morning. The sun is rising or rose at 7:06 at 82 degrees azimuth. Now, just real quick, I'll show you what I'm looking at. I'm going to click on augmented reality, and it will show you exactly what I'm looking at. I'm standing here again in a field in Dallas, and the sun is right on the horizon. But just to make sure that you're calibrated, you should see that sun icon in the PhotoPills visual right where it should be. And if you don't, or if you're planning for the sunrise or sunset, etc., click on visual calibration on the bottom left here of your phone. And what you want to do, the instructions are here. You're going to swipe left or right or up or down to basically align the sun where it is. So you can even do this in the middle of the day, or if it's nighttime, you can do this with the moon. But you want to align that sun where it's at currently, and that will help you get a better visual calibration. So I'm going to put the sun back, and always make sure you check to confirm calibration. I always do this after I travel, after I've been on a plane. For that matter, my PhotoPills app always needs calibrating. So, but if you're looking at Milky Way, sun, moon alignment with augmented reality, this is definitely really important. So that's where the sun's at right now. Let's go back to the planner. And again, as I mentioned before, if we go back to panel 3 and I click on that sun moon icon at the top, I can actually see the lines of where the sun will rise, where the moon will rise, sun will set, moon will set. So as I scroll through the day, I can see the sun direction. And again, right now in augmented reality, that sun's coming up right where I showed you guys, and that is right around 82 degrees azimuth, and that's where I was looking. Now, for some reason, I didn't have PhotoPills, or I wanted to be really exact on where my camera direction was looking, I could use my compass to make sure I'm directly at 82 degrees azimuth. So that's really important if I'm doing like blue hour blends, and I want to make sure my camera is pointed in the direction of the core where the Milky Way is going to appear. So I use that quite a bit. Okay. So I want to point out one thing. I'm going to back this up. PhotoPills does this, and it throws people off. The sun here is yellow, and that actually is the sun icon. And if you're ever trying to augment the Milky Way core, it's actually a big orange ball as well. And that actually is the icon for the core of the Milky Way. So don't think that that is the sun. But most of the time anyway, in the Northern Hemisphere in the summertime, that's the core of the Milky Way. But that's how you calibrate the app. And like I said, I always find my app needs calibrating. So I think it's real important. Otherwise, you might really mess up on your planning. So once you've calibrated it and got your settings, this is me using the app and augmented reality to line up the artwork outside of Death Valley with the core. And what I can do is I can place my phone, basically look out over the landscape. And all I have to do is take my finger and swipe left or right. And that actually will change my timeline. So what I do is I swipe left or right until the core basically lines up with how I want to take that picture. And on my phone, I just take a picture of the screen. So if you don't know, that's a volume up and the power button at the same time. And I have a saved picture, and I know where I need to be at what time to get that shot. Because often when I plan, I'm taking 3 and 4 different shots throughout the night. So later in the day, when I'm really trying to plan on what to do and how to do it, I know that I don't need to be at that location until 2 a.m. I need to be at this location at 12:30. And so this is the final shot for that particular example. What a lot of people don't realize is very helpful is you can also use night augmented reality to find out the star trail direction. So in this particular example, I can see Polaris. So I aligned Polaris to the top of this tree and went ahead and took star trails for that. But a better example is I did augmented reality on this dome. This is Lambert Dome in Yosemite. And I can see the star trail direction with the latitude lines there on the app. So if I want to plan my composition around star trails, I can do that. So it's really helpful to use that augmented reality. I think it's most people's favorite part of the app. Okay, so 2 final things that I love about this app. The exposure, or what I call exposure equivalent. And this is probably my favorite part of the app right now. I've been working with quite a bit. So the reason I would want to do this, this is a typical night shot where I took a test shot and then I finally kind of fine-tuned my exposure. The moon is up in the sky. There is the Milky Way, but as you can see, I can barely see it because we had a pretty bright moon. But I have some pretty good light on the landscape. And so my test settings for this shot was 2.8, 10 seconds at ISO 4000, and I was pretty happy with those settings. What I can do though is if I want to take a longer exposure for star trails, but have an equivalent exposure, what I'm going to do is take my app and set the calculate option to ISO. And what that does is I have down here at the lower portion here at equivalent settings, I now can say, well, gee, I took a 10-second exposure, but I want to see what this looks like at 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and take the clock icon and change that to 15 minutes. And I do need to set the aperture. So I usually bump it up quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to f8. And then what PhotoPills will give me is it gives me the ISO. And in this case, ISO is 320. So this is actually that shot. And so that's a 15-minute exposure. And really, it did pretty good. They look almost the same. And this is just straight out of the camera. I didn't do any edits to the shot. So this is such a nifty part of the app where I can do my test shot, and then I can decide to do a 30-minute star trail. And this is just my favorite thing. And of course, you can calculate this old style, right? But at 2 or 1 a.m. in the morning, I can't do any of those calculations in my head. I am no good at math. So I love going to exposure to try to figure out how to make a longer exposure to get star trails. And then the opposite of the star trails is if I want spot stars. And the reason I would want spot stars is if I am shooting the Milky Way or I'm shooting a star picture and I absolutely don't want any lines or star trails. And the reason that would be is if I know I'm going to crop that picture, or if I know I'm going to produce a really large print, the star trails to me make it look blurry. So the picture on the right is a 30-second exposure. And if I were to blow this up in a large print, it looks quite blurry. And basically those are star trails. The picture on the right, sorry, that was the picture on the left. Picture on the right, this is a 6-second exposure. And so I'm compensating with a higher ISO and better, much better pinpoint stars. And so if I were to produce that and make a larger print, ignoring all the noise, because these are also straight out of the camera, it's going to be a much better print and it won't look a little blurry. So I use the Spot Stars app or the Spot Stars menu to do this. So we've talked a little bit, if you know a little bit about Milky Way photography, to use what is called the 400 or the 500 rule. And that's just a general rule that when you're calculating your shutter speed to compensate for the movement of the Earth, you can basically take 500 and divide the focal length, multiply that by your crop factor. And that rule was pretty much made up for film cameras, but with the mirrorless cameras these days, it just doesn't work. And so I use the PhotoPills app, the Spot Stars menu, to actually calculate the 500 or the NPF rule. So the NPF rule is better for mirrorless cameras, and it is a incredibly complicated formula. And again, I'm not even about to do math really late, but it's easy to get off of PhotoPills. So when I go to that part of the app, I will first pull up this menu, and it basically says Spot Stars. And what you want to do is just put in your camera and put in your focal length and your aperture. And what it's going to take into account is your sensor size and the focal length, as well as your camera. And there are two settings. There's a default, and instead of default, it could say accurate. And I absolutely recommend, if you feel like you're going to make a really large print, you need to pick accurate. But here I do have it on a default setting. The degrees is actually the declination. So if you know the declination of the stars, which most people don't, just put it in there. Or if you don't know the declination, just leave it at 0. It works totally fine. And so in this case, for this particular picture, the 500 rule is 21 seconds, but the NPF rule at the default value, which means it's not completely accurate, but it's closer, is 9 seconds. And just notice how it's pretty much cut in half. If I were to change that default setting to accurate, it would be cut in half again, which means I would really need to take a 4-second exposure. But I want to show you the difference in these, because if you are making a really large print, it makes a huge difference. So the top picture is the 25-second picture. And if I do blow this up quite a bit, it's clearly star trails, and it looks very fuzzy. That second picture is a 15-second. So I'm cutting the time down just a little bit, still see the star trails, still looks a little blurry. The last picture, though, is the 10 seconds. So I'm pushing it a little bit past that NPF rule, but I am getting a little bit more pinpoint stars, and the nebulas start to look a little less blurry and a little bit more clear. And so, again, these are straight out of the camera, but when I have to do a really short shutter speed like that, you can see I really push the ISO. So in this case, I was at 12,800. And when I do that, I get a ton of noise in my shots, but I resort to a technique where I stack in a different software to reduce the noise. So stacking when I have to push the ISO that high helps tremendously. Example of the software is Star Stacks or DI Noise. I will use quite a bit as well. So, but that just is part of the app that I absolutely love, to make sure that I get really pinpoint stars. I mean, if we're looking at these pictures far away, they all look the same, except I lit the rock a little different each time. And you would think they're all the same, but when you do print them out to maybe be on a calendar or a large print, it makes a huge difference on your shutter speed. All right, that is actually it. I mean, it was kind of a quicker talk, but I went through the most popular things I use all the time that I constantly resort to in PhotoPills. So
That's great.
questions?
There is a question here, and if anybody else has any, this is a good time to put them in the chat. Jamie's question, it goes to your exposure example. She said that you said that you changed your aperture from 2.8 to 8.0. She's wondering why.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is completely subjective. Let me find that example. So because I'm increasing my shutter speed, so I'm going to have a huge long time. If I left my aperture the same, my ISO would be something like 5 or 10. I mean, what it's trying to do is compensate mathematically to get the same exposure. So I knew that if I left my aperture open really wide, my ISO would be something like -100, which isn't possible. So I knew I needed to close my aperture a little bit so that I can reach an ISO value my camera could handle. And so arbitrarily, I just picked 8. I could have picked 7.1, and my ISO probably would have been something like 100. Right? I could have picked 12, or I could have picked a tighter, smaller hole, and my ISO would have been a lot bigger. The reason I also picked a higher aperture is I want a very small ISO because I didn't want any noise in that picture. So the lower my ISO, the less noise that I'm going to get in that picture as well.
Hopefully that answered Jamie's question. Okay, so there's some nice comments in here. I'm not seeing any other questions. Last call. I'm going to get you to take your screen down, Shari.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So yeah, I like Jen's comment. She learned a lot and is ready to use that. When you go to England next week, well, Joanne, I'm in England right now, and I'll tell you, it's awesome. So I'm not seeing anything else in here, Shari. So I think that we can, let me just glance one time, because sometimes I'll flip through here and I don't see anything, and then somebody will be a slow typist and sneak one in on me. All right, let me go ahead and close your session out. Do you have, I know that you do workshops and you do tours, and so what, do you have anything coming up? Do you want to tell us?
Yeah, sure. I've got, yeah, thank you. I've got a workshop actually at the end of this month at Big Ben. We actually still have a few spots left. And then not anything until next year. And so Big Ben is where I go quite a bit. But I'm also returning to Mount Rainier in August of next year. And there's a few spots left on Mount Rainier. I absolutely love that place
I know
and
you
can't
can.
wait. We stopped doing Mount Rainier when the pandemic hit, and then now we're finally getting back. So I'm excited about that. Also, a couple of meteor showers next year. So this year was not good for meteor showers because the moon was in the way. Next year, both the Perseids and the Geminids are going to be amazing. Also, there's some workshops for the Perseids and the Geminids. And incidentally, Mount Rainier is during the Perseids meteor shower.
Okay. Curious, how many people do you take with you? How big is that workshop?
Just 8 people. Yeah.
Okay. That gives you a lot of elbow room.
Yes, exactly.
Shari, thank you for coming and doing this.
Thank you.
One of these days I'm going to ask you, you're going to say no, but hold off on that no, because I have a big ask and I'll come back around and get you off line to come and do another one. Guys, you can connect with Shari through her website, sharihuntphotography.com. If you're on Instagram, you can follow her around at Shari_Hunt_photography. Next week, Angela Maloney joins us from Virginia to present How to Go Wow, Sense of Wonder Photography. Until next time, go out, create something beautiful, and hope that we see you again soon.